everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to kick off in just about 30 seconds or so from now. Just give any latecomers a minute or two to join. Looks like we've got a full house today, Matt. So that's exciting. So far, 16 with us.
Looking good.
Fantastic. So, look, guys, topic of today's webinar is big or small, securing your network infrastructure. And with Virtual Graffiti today, we have our friends from Ruckus, CommScope. So just to do a bit of a brief intro, Virtual Graffiti is actually partnered with Ruckus CommScope for over 15 years here in Australia, and I think about 18 years or so in some of the other regions. Virtual Graffiti has had dedicated Ruckus cyber stores. It was originally called Ruckus Security, funnily enough. That name changed about a year or two ago to netwifi.com.au, where we advertise and we educate on Ruckus products. It's quite an extensive site. We actually had one of Ruckus's CEOs come out and tell us here in Australia how much they love the Virtual Graffiti storefronts for their products, and wishes that more partners would be innovative like us. We operate about 80 plus different cyber stores that assist different types of customers with their IT requirements. Matt, just quickly, who's Ruckus?
Absolutely. So, hey everyone, I'm Matt Hall. I work for Ruckus, and today, just tell you a little bit about Ruckus. And so, at Ruckus, when I first joined the company, we did Wi-Fi networking, and we have evolved quite a bit since that time. And so today we are an enterprise networking vendor that has both Wi-Fi and switching products. We also have a suite of software to tie everything together in terms of network management and reporting. And we're now utilizing quite a few AI tools to optimize our customers' networks.
Fantastic. And Matt, do you want to introduce yourself, and I'll introduce myself as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I say, hi, I'm Matt Hall. I'm actually based in Auckland, New Zealand. Don't hold that against me there, our Australian cousins. But yeah, as I say, I've been at Ruckus about 12 years. Through this time, I've been involved in a number of projects through different verticals with different customers. One of the things that I'm quite keen on, though, is network security. And I guess that's the topic of today's webinar. And one of the things I was lucky enough to be able to do during my time at Ruckus is Ruckus previously was a sponsor of the Black Hat conferences. And so I attended both Black Hat USA and also Black Hat in Singapore. And what we do is we build out a NOC team for the Black Hat conference. And the idea here is, that the US event sees about, I think, 30,000 people attend the event in person. And as part of the event, we provide Wi-Fi for the people coming along. And you can imagine the type of people that attend the Black Hat conference, right? These are the type of people who are absolutely going to try and get as far as they can into the conference Wi-Fi network. So that was an interesting time. So what we do is we have a Black Hat NOC where they put us in there with a bunch of other vendors, right? So one of those vendors was like Palo Alto, you got Ruckus doing your connectivity, and then we had RSA doing some analysis as well. And it was a really good experience to work with that team and all those different vendors. And just most recently, I'm currently involved in a project here in New Zealand where we're deploying Ruckus to every school in New Zealand. It's a government-funded project, which will see us deploy about 60,000 access points as part of a single network. We've got about 2 years to run on the project. Yeah, that's enough from me.
Fantastic, and funny that you mentioned RSA, Matt, because last week I was with RSA actually in Vietnam at their partner conference. Just a little bit about myself. I'm the general manager here at Virtual Graffiti. Many of you on this call probably already know who I am because I've been involved in some of the solution designing behind your computer network. I've been doing this for about 15 years now. Worked across a number of the vendors while they were launching within ANZ. Matt, we won't hold your Kiwiism against you at all, I promise. I'm also a transplant here to Australia, so I find we have to work with the best people globally where we can, and really help customers secure their network, from any sort of talent that we can bring in. With that, I think let's kick off into today's event and talk about the state of security here now. So
That's the perfect segue. Yeah, go ahead.
absolutely. So look, I mean, for me, the big drivers right now are data protection and regulatory compliance. But Matt, where do you see the key drivers right now?
Yeah, I guess as we can see on the screen, but that we have your regulatory compliance, and that is not only affecting big customers, but also smaller customers as well. When we have customers that are doing things like financial processing on their network and things like that, there are all sorts of standards and compliance that you have to conform to in order to be able to do these activities on your network. And in some cases, a lot of organizations even get audited for their compliance. Right? So whether you have a hard requirement because you're going to go through an audit, or you just want to be better at doing security and keeping both your data and your customers' data more secure, I think drivers for network security apply to everybody, right? The other point we've got here is protecting your business reputation, right? And you all hear of the companies in the media that get their data exfiltrated and then posted on the dark web. It's interesting, right? Because when a really, really large company goes through an event like that, I don't know, it doesn't seem to really impact them too much, but perhaps the smaller businesses get impacted more in terms of their brand reputation and revenue loss.
Oh, look, absolutely right. Of course, the smaller businesses can't afford to take that hit at all. It's the larger businesses with the large marketing departments that can, release a statement and then recover from it right away. They're not going to lose add-on contracts because of a data breach, whereas smaller businesses will. That last point as well, that enhancing network performance. I almost want to rehash that and make it, constantly improving our network performance and our security performance. If you're always in a state of constant improvement, you're only going to get better and better at responding to network threats, responding to cyber attacks, and responding in general to any incidents that you might have, and then get better at protecting PII, personal identifiable information, whether that is healthcare information, credit card information, anything really relating to any of your employees. It should always be a constant state of improvement that you're aiming for, and then lining that back with any regulatory compliance as well.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to our next slide and take a look at some of the challenges being faced by organizations today. So, as Thad just said, there is an evolving threat landscape out there. And you can't be complacent. It used to be the case where you could kind of just install something, walk away, apply a couple of patches every now and then, and you're good to go, right? But we're in a different world today. And that that is no longer really something that is acceptable for a lot of organizations just to stay with that model. You have to have proactive monitoring in your network. You have to be aware of what's going on. And look, one of the challenges with that, right, is having the right resource and expertise.
And I think we were chatting about this earlier, Matt, about that right resources, and I think as well, the IT industry hasn't always provided the best resources for customers as well. Maybe suggesting tools that don't scale with different sized customers. Really giving the most efficient advice so that customers can grow into different solutions. And this is one of the reasons why I do love Ruckus so much, is that you guys have solutions that scale from SMB businesses all the way up to customers that have 60,000 different Wi-Fi access points that need to be deployed, right? So every step along that journey from 1 or 2 access points all the way up to 60,000 customers are secured with your products. Um, looking at it further, technical vulnerabilities, human factors, and the growing attack surface. Um, look, the growing attack surface is massive, right? Back in the day, you could say, hey, look, Wi-Fi requires a password. Boom, it's secured. Now, we have to go a step further than that, which we'll touch on in just a minute here. But then there's also things like phishing links, right, that could widely affect customers on this call as well. So, there's quite a bit that goes on within our internal computer network.
Absolutely. One of the things that we see at Ruckus is, IoT is a bit of a buzzword, right? I think there are two buzzwords that are in the industry these days, right? One of them is IoT, and the other one is AI. And maybe just to touch on IoT for a moment, so like at Ruckus, we obviously do Wi-Fi access point technology, but our access point technology also has built-in IoT technology. So, for example, our products have Bluetooth and Zigbee radios embedded into them as well. And that's useful for customers in environments like, let's say, a hotel customer, to go into a hotel, use a key card for your door lock. These days, all of those door locks are online and they're communicating back to the front desk as you swipe your card, you maybe using the Zigbee protocol in the network. That's just one example, right? But in the context of IoT, we now have to be aware that actually it is possible for an attacker to be hiding out inside of one of your IoT devices and using that as a stepping stone to get further into your network.
Mm, And even lights these days are IoT connected to the internet. And if you ever have looked at the traffic that goes through those, right, it's quite a bit of traffic that bounces all over the internet. Whether it's overseas or to their local data center. It's quite shocking. I don't know if you've ever looked at any IoT devices.
Absolutely.
And Wireshark.
Yeah. Yeah. You get like about 5 connections going to China and a couple of connections going somewhere else. It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Look at saying that I have some smart lights next to me right now that I've got to go set up. But luckily I'll have a firewall and some Ruckus Wi-Fi in there to stop that from bouncing all over the places. Now, look, what's the impact for everyone on this call with a security incident?
Absolutely. I mean, it kind of goes without saying, but I guess if we just go a bit deeper, right? So obviously there is number one, which is, financial loss, right? I mean, that's the last thing that a business wants to suffer. Loss on the bottom line due to something not being configured properly or an update not being applied to your device, right? And then you got your reputational damage. So you start losing customers, obviously, right? If your reputation gets slung in the mud. And then your operational disruptions. So let's say you're a customer and you're operating a 24/7 distribution center, or even if you're a customer who has a help desk or a call center, if you start to get your agents with something funny going on their network and for example, calls stop coming in, that's money that you're losing, right? Then obviously there's the legal and regulatory consequences. And I guess it all kind of boils down to this impact on trust between your customer and yourself.
Mm, mm. And like even phones being down here for an hour, that could be, $1 million deal for a business coming in. You never know what can and will be missed, if something does go down.
Absolutely.
Matt, do you find more customers are asking for like SLAs and service level agreements with Wi-Fi, or how do you see it in the market?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, so the service level agreements really are typically requested by enterprise customers. And look, one of the things we at Ruckus, we obviously work closely with partners such as yourself. And at Ruckus, we empower partners such as yourself with the tools to be able to, I guess, firstly, report on networks to confirm that they're reaching the service agreement, which is put in place with their customer. And then following the reporting, we also have a bunch of remediation in place, which could be automatic actions taken by the network itself, or it could be recommendations to people in your team in order to make network changes in order to fix potential issues as they arise.
Fantastic, fantastic. So
Perfect.
let's keep going in here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I do just want to pause and just say, guys, if there are any questions, please feel free to ask in here. No qualms with asking now. Alrighty. So Matt, what's Ruckus's approach? So we've talked about some of the consequences. How do we prevent what makes Ruckus different from some of the other networking vendors?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, to be honest, like regardless of if it's Ruckus or any networking vendor, I think there are some general rules which are followed by people in the industry these days, right? So I guess the number one rule is security requires a layered approach, right? For example, back in the day, like, 1970, you have a password on your computer, that's the front door. If you can't get in, that's it, right? But there's more than one
Mm,
front door today, right? And there's more than one door. And so really security requires a layered approach. And that, to be honest, actually starts with physical access to devices, right? So the most basic example of this is, let's say that you've got a server with a file system on it, and that server is just sitting in your office space, right? If a criminal breaks in and they walk out the door with that hard drive or that server, then your data just literally walked out the door, right? And then obviously, things like cloud storage solutions and things like that are one way to overcome this problem. When it comes to networking, ensuring that your wired and wireless devices have some kind of authentication on them. And I'll drill down into this in a moment, but effectively, if I walk into your organization and I plug my device into the Ethernet port that's on your wall, I wonder how far I'll get into your network. A lot of customers find that, if they have physical security, they don't think they have to have like a lock on the port or something like that. So we'll talk about that in more detail in an upcoming slide. And of course, firewalling, that's a big one as well, right? So obviously, regardless of if you have a dedicated firewall vendor or you're using firewalling, which is built into another networking product like an access point or something like that, firewalls are still a very, very important component of your security strategy. Utilizing two-factor, right? So gone are the days where you just have a single password, because we all know that there are multiple challenges with keeping a single password secure, and also the complexity of those passwords isn't always followed through by users. And so two-factor is absolutely a thing. Securing traffic where we can through VPN, right? So if you're somebody
mm,
like myself and like yourself, traveling around a lot, you absolutely want to make sure that the connectivity between yourself and the things you're talking to is secure. And a VPN is a good way to do that. So we have here NAC technology, right? So NAC technology, or network access control technology, can look at devices that are connected to your network, validate the posture of the device, and then eject the device or quarantine the device into a separate part of your network if it's not complying to your policy or your standards. Everybody is mobile these days. So the use of MDM, or mobile device management software. So certainly if you're an organization and you have company issued mobiles, company issued tablets, you absolutely want to be using some kind of MDM to manage your devices. And what happens if you have a lost device? What happens if you have a rogue employee that just takes off with your company data, right? You want the ability to then lock that device down and control where your information is heading. The other big trend that we'll talk about more today is the configuration of zero trust. So zero trust is something that I would say most people use these days as an approach to their networking security. So you used to have a scenario where you had a firewall and a perimeter of your network, and everything inside of that perimeter was trusted. Days though, a lot of attacks can potentially come from within, right? So for example, all it would take is for you to double click an email attachment, launch a executable on your device, and then a remote attacker can take ownership of your device. And if you're on that corporate network, they then have a platform to pivot into other points of the network. And so the key here is basically, if you act as if every device on your network is untrusted, even those known corporate laptops, if you act with zero trust and establish a network environment which has policies in place, segmentation in place, you're going to basically always minimize your risk by physically and logically separating devices on your network.
Mm.
And then the final point here, and this is potentially for the larger customers, is implementing a security operations center, right? Gathering telemetry from different endpoints in your environment. Now, there are, if you're a smaller business, there's obviously services available from people that will do this for you. But most larger businesses now have dedicated security professionals in their team that are responsible for ensuring the IT security of an organization.
And we can actually help with that SOC for smaller customers with some of the vendor offerings that we have. So it's automated. It's interesting though, the two-factor thing, Matt, because like we host a litany of services here at Virtual Graffiti. Before we could even implement two-factor on a service that we published to the internet, we had like 1,000 requests in under a minute. And here for the second the port opened, and it's just like, oh,
it's nuts.
There we go. And the same with any email domain we've set up. Within seconds, it's getting spam through the internet here. The VPN is interesting. That always on VPN as well, with a lot of people working from home. We're 100% remote organization. So where would we put a firewall, right? We do have firewalls within our data center, of course. However, we can't deploy a firewall at every staff member's house, but we can deploy Wi-Fi access points to secure that network going back. So there's quite a bit you can do, and luckily the technologies today are much more flexible than they were a few years ago. Just in the interest of time, I'll move on here. Matt, talk to me about how do we segment our networks today?
Yeah, great question. I mean, so just as a basic concept, right? If you take, the internet obviously connects multiple organizations together, and company A obviously cannot access the infrastructure inside of company B because there are obviously a bunch of firewalls in place. And so that's a good thing, right? So what I would encourage companies to do is to think of their own internal internet exactly in this way, right? So for example, if you think about it, even within your own company, one of the things that we should be looking to do is break your internal network up into different segments and different zones. So as an example, yes, your laptop needs to be able to print, right? But however, does your laptop actually need to be on the same network as your printer, right? So printers are actually a very, very good target for attackers, right? So printers quite often sit there with super old firmware, super old operating systems on them, and they're very, very easy to compromise. So as an example, if you take your printer, place that into a separate logical network or a separate VLAN, and you place your corporate laptops in a different VLAN, this means that if an attacker was able to compromise the printer, they wouldn't be able to just like laterally jump into a PC on your network, for example. So yeah, basically the key here is to segment your network into different zones, different security zones. I see we have a question here. Let's just do that.
We've got two questions, Matt. So I hope you're ready. So first one from James Bean: what Ruckus specific security features do you offer?
That's a pretty broad question, right? So yeah, I mean, let me just try and cover a couple of basic things, right? In terms of Wi-Fi access, right? So these days, in terms of the Wi-Fi space, you're looking at the WPA3 security standard, right? Which implements things like AES 256-bit encryption over the air, and uses certificate authentication, all of that stuff, right? And so from a Wi-Fi point of view, Ruckus can absolutely provide the latest Wi-Fi standards. From an Ethernet and switching infrastructure point of view, one of the things we support on all of our products is wired port authentication. And then, as we'll learn about in a minute, we also have a software suite which can sit across your infrastructure to monitor events taking place in the environment, authenticate users against different authentication sources. So yeah, pretty broad question, but well, I think we'll cover some of that stuff in more detail shortly.
And then the next question here from Seth: Can Ruckus create or connect to a VPN?
Yeah, absolutely. So the most common use case that we see for our customers is where we have a Ruckus access point, which might be deployed like at a remote site. The access point can actually build a secure encrypted VPN tunnel back to the company's central data center. So that means that anybody connected to the Wi-Fi on that access point is able to take advantage of that encrypted secure tunnel. So yeah, we can.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay.
All right.
We have. Go ahead.
So if we just dive a little bit deeper on network segmentation, you think of it like a jail, right? So you've got your security guard in the middle. He might be your firewall. He's like, hey, guy, you can come over here. You can go into there. And then you've got all of your different security zones, right? So for example, your printers might be in one jail cell. Your CCTV cameras might be in a different jail cell. Basically, what we're doing is we're preventing these people or devices or things from communicating directly to each other, and we're facilitating that communication through a secure network element. All right, let's move on.
So well, Matt, what technology does that use here? Because that's, now can you dive a little deeper into that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So network segmentation traditionally has been done by creating VLANing in your environment, which is creating different layer 2 network segments, right? So at the heart of it, when we look at a network, we've got layer 2 traffic and layer 3 traffic. Layer 2 traffic basically is within your own local domain or subnet. And so when we're able to do things like provide dynamic VLAN segmentation, we can automatically implement VLANs in an environment, place devices in the correct VLAN. So that's one technique. The other technique as well is a newer technology, which we call VXLAN. A lot of vendors are doing that these days. Generally, VXLAN is used in larger environments that have limitations around, say, the number of VLANs or scaling.
And what are some devices that you'd have maybe in a different VLAN here, Matt? Like
Yeah,
I mentioned my lights earlier. Would you
absolutely.
put that in a different VLAN than my work computer, for example?
Absolutely. It's a great target, right? So, we mentioned IoT, right? IoT devices are actually notorious for being built on commodity hardware and having really, really poor code behind them. So what you do is, like, if you're an IoT developer, you've probably got some great, crazy idea in your mind about what you want to deliver as an end product, and you probably don't really care how you get there. You're just going to go to like Temu and you're going to buy some cheap like ESP chip off the shelf. You're going to do some like pretty crappy code that goes on it, and then you're just going to rely on a bunch of libraries that come open source. And you're probably not really going to understand what your device is capable of in terms of network services. And so, yeah, there is a big potential. We see a lot of that happening in the market. And because of that, you absolutely want to make sure your things go in their own VLAN and they're segmented. But then when we start to think about it, you're going to have a VLAN for your voice devices, a VLAN for your phones, a VLAN for your CCTV. Basically, the way I think about it is just do it by like logical function, right? If this device is in a category of device that all appears to do the same thing, then that's a good logical grouping of devices to sit in that segment.
I mean, Matt, that is part of the fun though, is when these devices are communicating, with maybe their passwords unencrypted. There, I
Yeah,
had that with
absolutely.
I won't name the vendor here, with a smarter device that I bought online that was a heater, and I'm like, oh, hey, maybe the heater shouldn't be broadcasting its encrypted password publicly for everyone. However, I will use it for fun. But it is
Absolutely.
definitely some crappy code out there with some of the IoT devices that I've seen firsthand.
And there's nothing you can do about that crappy code, right? And because the people who make the products, they either don't understand it well enough or they don't care, right? And if you want the
Mm.
functionality that product gives you, you've got no choice but to put up with their crappy code and use their okay product. But you have to make sure that you just cater for that and place it in a logical place on your network where you're not going to expose your risk to other parts of your network.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, look, it's not like I'm gonna go out and build new heaters every day and recode it from scratch, right?
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately, it doesn't scale like that.
Yeah,
I think
very good.
we've touched mostly here on the jail cell. Everything gets its own security group or VLAN and gets placed within it. And luckily with Ruckus, we can do dynamic jail cells that move. What are some of the other network control mechanisms that you guys have?
Yeah, I mean, if we kind of flip it around, so when you think about the different ways in which your network can be accessed, right? So, in terms of if you're on site, right, obviously got Wi-Fi, and then you obviously have Ethernet ports on in the wall or in your switch, right? So you've got
Mm.
those. If you're on site, there's only two ways that people can really access your network, right? If you're remote, it is a little bit different, right? Because we have spoken about VPN already. VPN basically exposes your your network over the internet, allows people to come in securely. But that is potentially a risk, right? Because if your VPN is not configured correctly, or you have some compromise in your VPN credentials, then you're exposing yourself. And then obviously the other thing, which I think we spoke about, was like if you have a port open to the internet, you were saying you opened a port and you saw thousands of requests coming in, right? And if you have a port open to the internet, because people do that, right? If you've got a web server, it's valid to put that on the internet so people can view your website, right? So there is obviously a need for that. We just have to make sure that when we open ourselves to the internet, we put some controls in place, right? Like, don't just throw your web server on the internet, put an application firewall in front of it so you can see what's happening, you can protect it, right?
Mhm. Mm.
Excellent. Okay, so these are the different ways in which we can connect to a network, right? So when you think about it, we have to think about if these are the methods that people can connect to the network, what are the controls that we can put in place in order to protect ourselves with those methods, right? So the first one that comes to mind, like at Ruckus, as I say, we do Ethernet switching, and if I was to walk into your company and plug my device into the Ethernet port, which is sitting in your reception area, I wonder, number one, is it actually patched into your switch and will I get a connection? And number two, if I do get a connection, how far I can get into your network. And so not a lot of people generally think about this, right? So any public area in your building that has an Ethernet port, if that is patched into a switch somewhere, that is a potential security risk. And so one of the things that we do with our technology at Ruckus is we can provide switch port security, right? So for example, when we think about Wi-Fi security, everybody knows that when you connect to Wi-Fi, you get a password prompt, right? And you have to put the password in. But when you connect to an Ethernet port, the green light comes on, the link comes up, and you have connectivity, right? Not many people are exposed to this, but it is actually possible to pop up a password box when somebody plugs into your Ethernet port, allowing you to configure your Ethernet network so that you can secure it kind of like as good as Wi-Fi, if not better.
Matt, I gotta ask, is this you here on the floor
That
typing
is
in?
not me on the floor.
That is not you. Okay.
Maybe that's like some really young version of me. I don't know.
Uh, but
Very
it
good.
is scary, right? And I know companies too that have just had the modem sitting there in a open box here on the sales floor that they're also storing liquor around for the Friday afternoon
Yep,
after drinks special, right? And any staff
absolutely.
member can walk up to it and plug in a port. Luckily they don't, because they don't know what the port is or if they even have the cable. However, that isn't a good enough defense, in my
Yeah,
opinion. And
yeah.
in addition to locks, you also should be locking down these ports. Now, how do we secure our wireless networks? Because
Yeah.
that's all changed in the last year or
It
two as
kind of
well.
has, right? Absolutely. And so, look, I mean, traditionally, there have been two approaches to securing Wi-Fi networks, and that really hasn't changed from that point of view, right? So you'll all be aware that if you're at home, you probably are going to have what they call a pre-shared key, which is just like a passphrase or something like that to connect to your Wi-Fi. And as a pre-shared key it's normally a shared key as well. They call it a PSK, right? So yeah, it's a pre-shared key. And it's shared between multiple devices, right? So for example, let's say in your office, if you continue to use a pre-shared key from your ISP issued router and everybody's using the same password, if you have somebody leave your company, I don't know anybody that asks the employee to sit there and remove the company Wi-Fi network from their phone when they move and leave the company, right? So potentially they're always going to have perpetual access to your network anytime they come within Wi-Fi range. And so it's super important in an enterprise or a kind of small business scenario that we're able to individually identify the devices or the users that are connected to the network. And that enables us to disable that user or device's access when that person leaves the organization. And so within Wi-Fi security, we've got WPA Personal, which is the shared key, and then we have what we call WPA Enterprise. And WPA Enterprise, as the name suggests, is originally designed for large enterprise organizations, but it's not too hard to implement this with technology these days for small business as well. But this enables for both a username and password combination, and it also enables and allows for certificate authentication. The benefit of certificate authentication is you don't even have to exchange your password and username over the air, right? You're doing encrypted certificate signatures over the air, and that's rock solid, right? That is the most secure way to do Wi-Fi security today.
This is a big one that we've been pushing out for a lot of customers, Matt, and integration work that we can actually come help you with. And the great thing is all it requires is a compatible Wi-Fi vendor and your Microsoft subscription, right? And then you can configure this, because Microsoft acts as your identity router and provider, and then compatible Wi-Fi is all that you need for certificate-based authentication, which Ruckus gives customers, I think of all sizes, correct? You scale it
absolutely
down and up.
Absolutely. I mean, whether you're a small business with like 10 employees or you're a very large enterprise with thousands of employees, we have solutions that fit in both markets. Yeah. All right. Let's move on and just talk. I think we covered this, right? But basically, when you use a pre-shared key, if someone leaves the company, you're vulnerable. Everybody's using the same password, so you can't track who is who. But another thing that's really interesting is we work in situations where, let's say we do a student accommodation building where every student in their dorm room requires Wi-Fi connectivity. When we do that, we have all sorts of weird things happen. Like, for example, if a student brings their Xbox into their dorm room and they want to connect that to the network, there are actually a lot of devices out there that don't support 802.1x, which is the WPA Enterprise, which is the username password authentication. So, like the light switch, the smart light switch, or the smart light bulb, those devices normally can only authenticate using a pre-shared key. And so in some cases, you are actually stuck using a pre-shared key, even though there's a better way to do things, just because of the limitation of the device. What I can say is that at Ruckus, we have a really neat technology where we allow you to have a unique pre-shared key for every user. So for the traditional modem or router that you'd buy, like from your small business store or whatever, they all come with a preset key, right? And that key, no one generally changes it. But at Ruckus, you can have up to 10,000 individual keys per network. And this means that you can give everybody inside of your organization their own key. When they leave the organization, you can remove the key. So making things a lot more secure by having that individual access.
And it's probably the number one way of accessing company resources is through the Wi-Fi, right?
Absolutely.
99% of users connect that way, whether it's from their phone or their laptop. So let's lock it down. Single sign-on. How do you guys implement? Hey, how am I going to remember all these passwords, Matt? Because
I mean that's one challenge. Absolutely.
Small brain here.
I mean, basically, as you say, one of the issues today is that users are having to remember a lot of credentials in terms of either your daily life, right? What's the PIN number to my card? What's the password to get in the alarm system in the office? There's just all of these things that you have to remember in your brain, right? So having single sign-on is pretty essential, right? So I think a lot of organizations have really started to master that, like with the event of things like Microsoft Entra ID, and like if you're Google House, Google G Suite, like we now have some pretty good technology that enables us to have centralized credentials with directory services tied behind it, and then we're able to use those credentials in a variety of different ways using protocols like LDAP and SAML and other things as well, right? So I don't know, do you agree the world is in a much better place today than it was like in the early 90s, for example?
Even versus 3 years, they get right, like, creating enterprise applications back then and Entra ID was a bit of a, I'd probably have an easier time landing on the moon than,
Yep.
uh, getting single sign-on set up. But now,
Yeah.
we really advent for passwordless based on how easy it is for SMBs to get configure.
Yeah.
We do have a question from Ryder here, and I think there's another question in the Q&A. Before we move on, Ryder asks, can you prevent people sharing their dedicated pre-shared keys?
Yeah, so look, one of the things that we can do with Ruckus technology is we can limit the number of devices that a pre-shared key can be consumed on. So we do this by binding the pre-shared key to the MAC address of the device. So let's say that you have your primary user and you give them the key. If they put that key in their device and they decide to share that key with their colleague or their friend, that key will not work on any other device because it's already been used once and it's already been bound to the MAC address of the original user.
Follow-up question on that. I know some companies and Ryder went ahead and asked this for us.
Yeah,
Read my mind.
there it
Uh,
is.
Modern devices often use virtual MAC addresses though that rotate, right? So how does Ruckus and other Wi-Fi security vendors account for that?
Yeah. So a couple of things. So when you look under the hood, what you're probably referring to, like if you have an iPhone or an iPad, right, there's a thing in your Wi-Fi settings and it says use private MAC address, yes or no. And if you tick use private MAC address, what it actually does is it rotates your MAC address on a regular basis. So the first thing is, which is really difficult for all vendors, right? Apple have started behavior where they are randomly changing the interval at which they rotate the MAC address, which just makes it really hard to pick, right? The reason they do this is because they're trying to provide privacy to end users, right? So don't track me because I look like someone different every time. So from that point of view, so look, long story short, it is difficult for vendors like us to keep up with this. But what we have started doing recently is implementing a system where, previously I was talking about that one key is bound to that one MAC address. What we're looking at doing now is having, say, for example, 5 MAC addresses that can consume that one key, and then looking at how active the MAC address is using machine learning, and then blocking out old MAC addresses that are not used after a period of time. So we're starting to use a little bit of ML and AI to get a bit smarter about security and kind of drop off those older MAC addresses or devices that are no longer connected.
Pretty cool. Question from Lucas. I think we missed it a few minutes ago. Is WPA3 enterprise supported? So I think I talked
Yeah.
earlier about how the standards changed in the last year or two. We had WPA2. What's WPA3 before we jump into is
Yeah.
it supported?
So in a nutshell, yes, at Ruckus, we do support WPA3 on all of our product sets. But what WPA3 offers you is, number one, it does away with that four-way handshake that you're probably familiar with WPA2, right? There's this thing where you can force someone to authenticate and you can look at their handshake and you can crack their password offline. You can no longer do that with WPA3. They have a thing called SAE, simultaneous authentication of equals, which replaces the four-way handshake. The second thing that you get, which I think I already touched on in WPA3, is the ability to do 256-bit encryption over the air. Previously, we do 128, but that's only available for WPA3 Enterprise. So yeah, I mean, there's a couple of other little things, but they're the two main differences.
Yeah, I think the big thing is too is not every device yet supports
Yes,
WPA3, and we're
absolutely.
probably a few years away from every
Yeah,
device support. But it's almost like with the iPhones here, we went from Lightning to USB-C. I still have 2 iPhones on my desk that are Lightning, and I'm not yet in USB-C. So in a few years, we'll all be caught up to the WPA3 standard,
Absolutely.
and then that will be the minimum here for Wi-Fi networks.
In the meantime, we're stuck using WPA3 compatibility mode, which also provides support for WPA2 on the same network. So there is that compatibility.
Mm, mm.
Just on this slide before we move on, I think we're running out of time rapidly. So just really quick. So in here, what we're showing is the ability for a Ruckus Wi-Fi system and Ruckus authentication system. So at Ruckus, we have a product called CloudPath, which is kind of like a Radius server, which allows you to interface into directory services. And so one of the things that we do here is if you authenticate to the Wi-Fi, one of the things we can do is we can then send a message to the firewall to tell the firewall who the user is, right? So one of the things that's a challenge for some organizations is in order to apply internet filtering or firewall policy, you need to be able to work out who the device or the user is. One of the ways to do that is to pop up a portal and ask the user to log into the firewall. Another way to do that is to integrate single sign-on with a domain controller. But if you're in a BYOD environment and you don't have users that are all registered inside of your domain, then we have the ability for us to authenticate the users through a service like Entra ID or something like that through Ruckus CloudPath. And then what we can do is we can provide the username and some group membership data to your firewall. So your firewall can then provide the appropriate level of content filtering for that user.
So Matt, maybe I'm allowed to gamble at work because it's part of my job. However, the accounting team, they're not allowed to gamble because, they have access to company funds and we don't need that going on to the horse races, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Cool.
Exactly.
Cool. Hopefully no one is allowing gambling on their company resources. But look, it is helpful if you have maybe somebody in marketing who needs to be able to buy booze for the company event, but then you want nobody else within the company being able to buy booze while they're on company
absolutely
work hours.
All right. Just in the interest of time, so we just touched on a couple more slides. So the other thing that we can do at Ruckus is we have discussed this issue with a pre-shared key. And so one of the things that we can do with Ruckus is we have this automated onboarding, right? So for example, if you have a BYOD user come into your environment or a user that's not normally in your directory, we have the ability with Ruckus technology to provision credentials on the device. And this could be done automatically or manually. So what you're seeing on the screen here is this is our manual provisioning process, right? So I log in using my Entra ID, I get a link to an executable that I run, and what's happening here is it will configure my network profile for me. It'll put a certificate on my device so I can do secure network authentication. And so that's that's option number 1, right? But if we go to the next slide, we have a look and we can see that we have the ability to do automated credential provisioning via something like Microsoft Intune. And so, for example, our Ruckus CloudPath and our Ruckus One solution are able to communicate using the SCIP protocol directly to MDM services. And this is useful because we can use this protocol to automatically install a certificate on that end user device, and then it will use that certificate to authenticate securely to the network. So automatic certificate deployment means no passwords, no usernames, because it's just automatically happened through your Intune, and then it will authenticate to the network using the certificate that has been installed on the device.
Fantastic, Matt. We are pretty much out of time. I think the questions have kept us pretty engaged. Let's just run through the summary and then we'll give a minute or two for any questions. All right. So one of the big things is that network security impacts everybody. Whether you're a one-person company all the way up to 100, devices are online more and more these days, and that kind of leads into the attack vector surface. Not only are people coming across our endpoints, that might be coming across our gateway, that might be coming across a vulnerability on our storage device. There's so many different attack vectors, including the IoT smart lights and smart heaters and door locks that we mentioned. Really enjoyed your chatting about wired networks needing to be secured. I didn't know you could actually require username and password. I thought it was mostly certificate based, so that was some insight for me as well. And then credential sharing, I think is a ugly beast on its own. But yeah, look, and lastly, a lot of this can be automated with the right IT provider in your pocket, helping you along the way and selecting the correct products.
Perfect. I think you did a good job at summing that up. All right.
Fantastic.
I think now we are kind of at the top of the hour, but maybe if we open up for a couple of questions, if anyone has any additional questions, just throw it in the chat window.
We've got to thank you here, and then Ryder to our virtual MAC addresses earlier said, "Wow, that's pretty awesome," which I tend to agree. That is pretty awesome. Gonna have to get a few of the new test APs that you guys have released.
I'm sure we can sort you out with something.
Guys, feel free to ask any questions here. We'll give 30 seconds, otherwise we'll jump into. We've got another thank you for you, Matt.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks everybody for attending.
Absolutely. So look, with that, let's jump in, and then if any questions come through, we can go ahead and answer. Guys, if you have any questions, if you want to do a product demo with Matt and myself, if you want to just chat Wi-Fi and network security, feel free to ring our phone line at any time, that 0293881741, or give us an email at sales@virtualgraffiti.com.au. With that, Matt, I don't think we have any questions. We're getting some thumbs up. I'm going to give us a thumbs up as well, and thank you for your time.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everybody. We'll see you again soon.
Awesome. Cheers, everyone. Have a great day.